going to talk about selling to different generations and why that's important today. And to introduce myself and kick it all off, I'm James Davis, Managing Director of C-Level Operations down here in APAC, and I'm a millennial, and I'm the one that gets kicked around all the time because I want instant gratification. I need that pat on the back. I need that instant messaging. I need that little bing and a trophy on my app to tell me I'm doing a good job.
I love it.
That's pretty funny.
I like being self-aware too.
Right. I love it. Well, I think the same goes to me though. Alex Farling, Lifecycle Insights. And you know, I'm a Gen Xer, and I know it because, and anybody who listens to me knows it because I talk about sincerity and authenticity all the time, and how that's way more important than brand awareness, or you know, what brand you're coming from, or what's happening on social media. You know, that people do business with people, and I find that sincerity and authenticity to be a super important part of my sales process and my buying process.
So I am Marnie Stockman from Lifecycle Insights. When James brought this idea up of having a conversation around how to sell to different generations, I was fascinated by it. Like Alex, I am a Gen Xer. And if you look at the description of it, the one that stuck out for me was that I am comfortable with both new and traditional media. So I've got a 20-year-old daughter and a 22-year-old son who Snapchat me in the mornings, right? And then my mom calls me in the evenings. So for sure, you know, I'll take my news either way. How about you, Shawn?
Shawn Walsh, Encore Strategic, and I am definitely a Gen Xer. And you know, the part that really resonated with me was that if you're doing business with me, you got to show a value proposition right out of the gate. I need to know I'm getting value, and I need to have trust. If I feel that you're blowing sunshine up my butt, or you're just glossing over points, it's not going to go well. We had in my CRM in my company, we had a category for vendors and clients that was called DTM. When we had a new employee, they said, "What does DTM mean?" Somebody said, "Oh, that means dead to me." When Shawn flags that, he doesn't care if that customer's coming back with fistfuls of hundreds. We are never doing business with them again.
That's awesome.
So once you lose trust, it's game over.
I love it. That is outstanding. So James, you want to provide some more context around this?
Well, I think even from this intro, you can see just from two generations the different approaches. And why I brought this up as a topic when we were having conversations between Alex and you, Marnie, is we're not thinking about that as from an MSP perspective. All I ever hear with generational topics is, oh, those millennials and Gen Zs can't, they're terrible employees. I need to give them all this feedback. They don't just get in and get the job done. And while that's all false, we're only looking at inwards, and we're not really having those conversations around what our client profiles are and the changing demographics. Our industry is changing a lot. And a lot of that's not just to do with technology and security risks, it's actually because the buyer demographics are changing as well. And I think that's important to understand and discover. And there's a few things that we can dive into around the different generations, but even just the life cycle and where people are up in their lives outside of the generations. If you look at your client base, great majority of your clients are going to be baby boomers because they're the ones with established businesses. They're the ones that got all you Gen Xers in the first place that were starting all these MSPs because they didn't understand technology. They needed someone that they could trust and build that relationship up, and from their buying behavior, that's how we created our MSP, create it stable and consistent. I've been in the industry long enough to see the Gen Xers become all the CEOs and stuff now, and those buying behaviors and interactions has changed. And now my generation, being millennials, we're starting to become the C-suite or startup businesses. And our MSP industry hasn't shifted from any of that. And because we're not talking about it, this is where I wanted to expose this and think about how is your business model working? How are we interacting with our clients? How are we providing service? All of those sort of things are becoming more and more important. we're all just focusing generally on we're providing some security controls through technology because there's a demand, there's reactive demand there, but there's a much bigger swell that's coming up that no one's really taking notice of. And I think that all comes down to the businesses themselves. And when you start looking at the statistics, 5% of businesses only get above 5 employees, at least down here. I don't know what's like up in North America, but I'm assuming it'd be around the same sort of thing. So the MSP market, we're already targeting above 5% of overall businesses, and we're in a very competitive market.
Yeah,
Where we started,
I think you're seeing a lot of the same things I saw as an MSP owner. And that is, I owned an MSP for 16 and a half years. And in the beginning, I think all of my customers were baby boomers. Toward the end, probably more and more of them were I was seeing second generation and third generation owners that were Gen Xers coming in and taking the place. And now on the vendor side, we certainly see millennials buying from us every single day. And so it is interesting to talk about the difference in the way that those folks work. When I really sat and read the article that spawned this discussion, when I saw Gen Xer, I heard omni-channel communication. When I saw a millennial, my brain went to, I got to be on social media and communicating with them where they are. And so just a lot of not even just the sales and the close process, but the marketing and the meeting these folks where they are, they're all in very different places.
Well, and in terms of the sales, go ahead, Shawn.
No, I was just going to say, James, you said something that resonated with me, and that the millennials always get the bad rap, and I agree with that. You guys do get a bad rap, and it is not accurate. And I have this conversation with business owners all the time because I always hear people saying, "Oh, millennials, I got to give them a trophy," and I'm the first one to defend you guys, because when I sold my company, I had probably one of the best teams that I had ever put together, and it was mostly millennials. When I first started my company, I had trouble with getting people just to show up on time. And, when I sold the company, I was the last one into the office. They were beating me to the office. But the conversations I had were very different. I mean, I was brought up in a time when you went for a job interview, and, you basically only answered the questions you were asked. And, you had a great incentive plan. It was called work or get fired. And, but the thing I always hear people say about millennials is that, well, they want to be CEO on day one. And I correct them and I say, they don't want to be CEO on day one, but they do want to know what the path to becoming CEO eventually is on day one. They want to know that there is a path and that they are that their work is going to allow them to be part of something bigger. And if you don't lay that out correctly in the interview process, it's not about you choosing them. They're not going to choose you. And really, you're going to lose out in the long run. And I think the same thing goes with selling to millennials, because you're absolutely right. They are in the C-suite now, and they are starting to become the business owners who we're going to deal with. And when you walk in the door, it's got to be more than just about the value proposition. It's got to be, what's the big picture here? And if you are not big picture focused, you are not going to get their attention.
So it's interesting you say that, because as I mentioned, my daughter's 20 and she was interviewing for an internship, and they asked her where she saw herself, or would she see herself in that company in 5 years? And her answer was, well, that would really depend on the culture. Right. So it wasn't about like the money or the security or any of those other pieces. And she was very curious about the culture, which I thought was interesting. The other piece that James brought up that made me, so I took some notes, was a mention of risk. And if you think about baby boomers' risk tolerance versus a millennial's risk tolerance, and maybe how they approach it, if MSPs are selling around security, right? I think the whole sales security conversation differs. And we certainly talk a lot about, red is bad, green is good. James, in the world of gamifying, how your business can get better to have reporting around red, yellow, green, right? Like it's bad. We need to get the red out. It simplifies the conversation that targets the millennial version of the gamification of the work versus red equating to risk, which is more around the alignment of, baby boomers are very security conscious. And then Shawn, to your point, with our generation, very much wanting the value of like that strategic conversation because you're providing value to the business. So I think there's a way to have the conversation, but it is nuanced, based on who you're talking to because of the way they respond to it.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point that you guys just made. Shawn with the big picture purpose. That's what we buy into. It's the culture. We want to know what the best practice is. We want to learn, and that's not what MSPs actually converse about. So exactly what you said, Marnie. We still go into the conversations as a risk base. We're talking to the baby boomer generation, where if you turn it around and you gamify it a bit and you're putting out that longer term planning, yeah, maybe the millennials aren't quite there yet, but they're looking to be guided and coached through that process as well. And it's not about the technology necessarily. This is where, as an MSP, I see we all dive into that straight away to that technical part. We're much more interconnected and collaborative. It's more about the people. So tying it into not just the technology that's there, because we're stereotyping here, but most of us millennials think it's all on the cloud, it's all good and fine. So it's more about what are our practices, what are our processes, how do we get our people to understand? So we're looking for education, not just for ourselves, but then the rest of the team, because that's how we look at it. So that conversation when we're going in at a risk assessment and we just go, this is a point in time, that's not going to help us. That's not buying us in that there's that longer term future and what we're actually building towards. But then we've got the trouble as well. Most millennials, if you're working with them as owners, most millennial companies are small, so in startup mode. So there's that different mentality as well. Unless you're working with a more established business, then you've got to be coaching them how to actually manage up to the higher ups as well. Because that's often the other problem is we can see all this innovation that we need to put in, but the older generations don't see it. Like you just think back to Microsoft Teams. It's been around for ages. Skype's been around for ages. It wasn't really till COVID, till most of the older generations actually bought into, oh, hey, this actually works. And that's what my people actually need. It required that sort of disruption.
As a business owner, as an MSP, I had all those tools and I still drove to meet all of my clients because a little more old fashioned, we'll say. We wanted to shake that hand. We wanted to be in front of people to have that real and relationship building kind of authentic me to you relationship when we did business. And I think that comes from me just assuming that everybody was a Gen Xer just like me.
That's interesting because you had mentioned meeting them where they are, right? And some may well prefer to have the social, to have the Zoom interaction because on either end, right? I'm busy and I found this is more efficient. Great. Or like, could you have sent that in a text message? Did it need to be a meeting? Right? Like I say that all the time. Did that have to be a phone call? That could have been a text and that email could have been a meeting or that meeting could have been an email rather. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's an interesting take. We'll include the article in the link below so that people can read about kind of the different approach on looking at the different generations and how it may impact. First, to James's point, like what's going on in your office, and do you have a Taco Tuesday for the millennials? Do you have, a plan for the value for the Generation Xers and for the baby boomers, some security and what that looks like, and also for how to sell. So thanks all.